Nach dieser Folge werden Sie wissen, wie in Venedig das erste öffentliche Opernhaus der Welt entstanden ist, ob man es heute besuchen kann und wer hinter dem großen Aufbauprojekt steht. Oper am Gänsemarkt Insight. Einblicke in die vergessene Hamburger Berühmtheit. Folge 4. Teatro San Cassiano in Venedig, das erste öffentliche Opernhaus der Welt.
This is the site where history was made. This is the first public opera house in the world.
Sagt Dr. Paul Atkin. Er ist Gründer, Unternehmer und Musikwissenschaftler mit über 35 Jahren Erfahrung in der Wirtschaft und einem Doktortitel in Musik. Im Jahr 2014 verkaufte er seine Unternehmensbeteiligungen, um sich dem Wiederaufbau des Teatro San Cassiano widmen zu können. Eine Idee, die er seit 1999 hegte.
The reason why we're rebuilding this theatre, and this is the key point, no one living today has ever listened or seen an opera written by Monteverdi, Cavalli or Vivaldi in precisely the type of small, intimate Venetian opera house for which they wrote. You know, we've never heard the acoustics they heard. We've never seen the stage machinery used for which they would have seen, for which they wrote, where they allowed spaces for spectacle. So that's why we need to build this theatre, and because it's so tiny, we don't have that space. And in Italy we have 3,000 theatres, but we don't have that small theatre anymore. This is about Venice telling the whole world that it's still here and it has something to say. And if you're going to have a conversation, you don't want to be the only one speaking, you want to be listening as well. So it's very, very important that we go to our friends in Napoli, or to Roma, or to Bologna, or to Milano, and bring in their music. It's also very important that we hear music from around the world and from around Europe. Again, our focus happens to be Baroque opera, but it would be wrong if we kept it to Venice. Yes. We have to share the world. It's about embracing. It is about a conversation. So, as you know, a good musician listens, and that's what we need to do as well. Yeah. So, Napoli has such a wonderful history. It would be a crime not to perform their operas here. Here you are. This is where the historical place is. This is literally the entrance to the theatre. There would be originally the ticket booth, but there would be another passageway going onto that canal, Rio San Cassan, to arrive. This is the main entrance, and if you walk over to that bridge and you look back, you'll see that it looks more like an entrance suitable for a theatre, whereas here it's not. It's just a garden door. You'd never know, right? You'd never know. There was also a second entrance, which is from here. And this passageway would lead straight directly into the theatre that way, but that leads you to the canal Rio della Madonnetta. Three main entrances, all by canal, and then you have this one way to walk. But this is the site where history was made. This is the first public opera house in the world. And yours in Hamburg was the first outside of Venice?
Yes.
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 Wow.
Correct.
Yeah. First of all, there are only three theatres in Venice. The great, brilliant La Fenice. There's the Malibran, which is a later version of later reconstruction. And then there's the Goldoni that establishes for plays. So there is no small, intimate Teatro San Cassiano. Our difference is that we will have the original stage machinery and the original costumes and the original historically informed performance of opera. So it's much more than just building a theatre. It's actually about how you reapproach the stage machinery, how you reapproach staging opera at this time, and how you create a world-leading centre for the study of Baroque opera, not just in the orchestra pit, but on the stage itself and behind the stage. And this is the concept that's very important. It's more than just a theatre. The other big point, which is very, very important, is that I spend most of my days talking about regeneration, impact and sustainability, and very little talking about opera. That's because Venice has a huge problem about sustainability. And we are all now involved in finding a future for Venice that is sustainable. And by creating a company that works already, as I say, with 27 different Venetian companies, we are creating an industry based around its culture. And the solution we all agree on, I think everybody in Venice agrees on, is that the future has to be based on its cultural history. And so restoring the theatre that no longer exists, restoring that part of its cultural history, that Italy's greatest gift to the world was opera. By restoring the first ever theatre, it's a wonderful way to refocus on the future. You know, this project is as much about the future as it is the past. And Venetians love that. And they love the fact that we work with Venetians. When it's open, we will employ 160 Venetians. We have a huge problem here about population decline. We need new companies like this to create the investment. Inside the garden, there's a wonderful mask, which is actually in a fountain inside the garden today. And that may well have been across this arch to identify as the theatre, or it may have been on the door of the opera house. We don't know. It's a private garden now. It's now owned by the house across from the Rio San Cassan. There's a little bridge into it, and that is the Palazzo Albrizzi. And this is the private garden, and the family have been very kind. They allowed us into the garden. We had a look. And the pathway still shows the shape of the old theatre.
Oh, yeah.
So you could identify that the theatre was there just by walking in the garden. But it is unbelievably small. Capacity of the theatre at the moment is 405. That includes 99 seats in the platea, in the orchestra stalls, so 6 rows only in the stalls. It's tiny. It's a tiny little tower. And then, as I said earlier, there are 5 tiers, 10 meters high, over 153 boxes, and 2 people in every box. If you're standing on stage and you're looking at the boxes and the tiers, that's 10 meters high. Now you have 2 or 3 meters below for the machinery, and you have 2 or 3 meters above for the machinery. So you have a probably 15-meter high building. You know, as you said, I think it's tight and high. And had the theatre been built in another city where there was plenty of space, it may have been much larger and much lower. And that's very important because opera evolved the way it did because it was in Venice. It evolved in Venice as public opera. And because all the theatres were relatively small and tight and high, it evolved as chamber opera essentially in the early years. By the time you had the great theatres, Royal Opera House or La Scala, they are 3 times larger. And so that reflects how popular opera has become. But as the opera gets more popular, so the theatres get larger, so the orchestras get larger. So you lose the ability to stage small, intimate Baroque opera. We all know how important in Baroque opera it is to hear the notes. The notes play against each other. And by having such a small theatre, you don't have to over-sing, you don't have to overplay. You get to hear the right balance, and it goes back to the point we made earlier about none of us living today have ever heard this music in its right context. I love Wagner and Bayreuth. But he built a theatre specifically to hear his music correctly. We need to do the same for Baroque opera.
Yes.
And when I say Baroque opera, we're talking about 17th and 18th century music opera, not just Baroque opera, it's an easy phrase. This is a commercial theatre, so it's built by the Tron family to make money. Therefore, they want to have as many ticket sales as possible. Every box is just under 1 width wide. So you and I standing together now, if we turn, that's our box, just one width. And then they go as high as they were stable, And the original theatres were demolished because they weren't stable. The first ones I mentioned earlier in 1581. They literally fitted in as many boxes as possible, 153 over 5 tiers, and it's about getting as much revenue as possible. And the great thing about all theatres is they're not designed ever from a perfect view of academic or cultural or artistic need. They're designed by the space of land they have. And in Venice, if your shape of land is that shape, your theatre is designed to fit that shape. So with the San Cassiano, it's rectangular square type shape. With the Giovanni and Paolo, it's much longer and narrower. So you have the same fundamental theatre design, but Giovanni and Paolo is stretched. So you have the lontanio inside the theatre, not outside the theatre, whereas San Cassiano, they're outside the theatre. You have much more space, you have longer sides. So the design always fits the shape of the theatre. Well, when we started, we thought it was impossible. I felt it was wrong. I felt we had to build the theatre, but I thought it was impossible. And so we started with that expectation. Then we found that the garden has the same footprint of then exists today. So I thought, okay, we can do this. And then I pursued it, but then the garden became impossible itself. But I realized that Venice could sustain the theatre, and we could build the theatre in Venice. And I have to say that the Soprintendente, the Comune, the Uffici Tecnici, the Comitati Privati, the Comunità, all been wonderful. They've all at first thought, okay, this is a bit crazy. And then they thought, hang on, this works. This really does work. The Venetian people and the Venetian community have been fantastic. We now work with 27 different Venetian companies. So we are building the whole project with Venetians. This is just not a project from some foreigner. This is a project for Venice, built with Venetians, and therefore they're empowered. They're involved in the project. So our graphic designers are Venetian, our lawyers are Venetian, our architects are Venetian. Our whole team are Venetian in different ways, and together we're making it happen.
Das zweite öffentliche Opernhaus der Welt ist in Hamburg im Jahr 1678 entstanden, 41 Jahre nach dem Teatro San Cassiano. Heute wollen wir mit Ihrer Unterstützung auch in Hamburg das alte Opernhaus wieder sichtbar und hörbar machen.
Similarities with London to Venice. This part of Venice is the main centre is in St Mark's, and then you cross the main canal into this area. In the same way with the Globe in London, you cross the city, cross the Thames to the South Bank. So you had an area that was outside of authority, outside of the eye of the church. So the Basilica's on the other side of the canal, come across here. Everybody's wearing masks, so there's some protection of identity. So yes, the church didn't like these things, but in Venice it's more liberated than most cities. But there is a geographical pushing it away from the centre. We will have our own house orchestra and artistic director, Andrea Marcon, and the Venice Baroque Orchestra. They are our founding house. And when we stage a historically informed opera, that will be under very strict criteria, and we will have the original costumes and performances and the stage machinery. But we want to invite the world to come to Venice, and we want the world to come and bring its opera with it. And so we will allow other people to come with their vision of historically informed performance, and to play and to perform, and to allow our theatre to become a hub of cultural exchange. Because I don't have the rights on how you perform historical informed Baroque opera. None of us do. So we will do it our way, but someone will do a run of performances, say in Amsterdam, and at the end they'll come and do 6 more performances with us and show us how they want to address the problem of historically informed opera. The one thing I think wouldn't work is people doing entirely new versions where you have an electric guitar or a modern stage design. You have to have the theatre as it is because it's the only one like it, and people are paying to see that. But everybody has a different interpretation of how you address the question of historically informed. So let's have a conversation. Let's have an exchange of ideas. Probably the most important driver here is education. We just do not know what we don't know at this stage. And so by exploring performance practice, as you've discussed, we are going to learn a lot more. We're going to educate ourselves a lot more. And that works in the orchestra pit, it works on stage, and it works for the public. And you have to therefore have exchange of ideas for it to work. And I wouldn't dream of being the one who says, no, this is the only way we approach historically informed performance. It's not my right to do that. My right is to build the theatre, to be a facilitator for people who have the talent to perform Baroque opera and Baroque music, because we'll do also chamber music as well in the theatre and all sorts of things. And no reason why we can't do new productions. But it's not for me to define this. And so, people are cleverer than I to set this out, how we should do this. I think we have to make people comfortable today. There's no point, and you can have a debate all day long. I have examples from my research of theatres where people stand only, where people sit only, where people sit and stand in the platea. So it's a debate we will approach and address it at the right time. No historical sitting. The best seats I've ever found in any theatre are in Český Krumlov in the Czech Republic, where they have these benches. And these benches are so wide, about a sheet of A4 paper wide, and they're high up. But they're designed at the right posture. And I sit there with a straight back and a good comfortable posture, and I'm fine. In our case, we will again return to the historically informed sources, to the archives again, and to the historically informed vision of the theatre. And so when we have a performance, you will have Act 1 for an hour, 15 minutes, whatever, generally. Then we'll have an interval, a long interval, where people will be able to eat and relax and discuss Act 1.
How long?
Hour and a half.
Oh yeah.
Proper interval. Time to have dinner. Then you go back to Act 2 for an hour. You return and have your dessert and dolce, and then you return for 40 minutes of Act 3 to close off the evening. It's exactly in the way that they would have done at the time. They wouldn't. These things went on for a long time, and you have a break. So you may have 6 hours in the opera house, but it's a wonderful evening and it's a wonderful experience. And you go home, have the best night of your life, because let's not forget, this is about spectacle. I'm an academic. My great friend and colleague, Stefano Putuzzi, our director of research, he too is an academic. We want to get the academic facts correct. But this is about revisiting where the idea of spectacle exploded and where the opera boom exploded. And that was about having fun. That was about entertainment. There was a reason why people wore masks. So that's what we're going to revisit. I was going to come back to the point about COVID, because we've been building this theatre and looking at the research at a time of COVID. And one thing, it occurred to us in the work, when you sit there and you think of each box has a wooden partition to the right and to the left, it has space for 2 people, so 1 family, and it's closed off. This was built 3 years after the last peste, so last plague. Yep. It was at a time when people smelled badly, there was disease, there was need to keep yourself away from people, and people were wearing masks for protection. Sound familiar? Well, the wonderful thing about music is that things always interconnect. And so theatres will be connected by a piece of music or brothers, in your case, from composer to architect. And there's a connection always. And that's the beautiful thing about music. It brings us closer. Yeah. And after COVID, I think we all need this more than ever.
Die Historische Oper am Gänsemarkt ist eine gemeinnützige Gesellschaft. Sie ist auf Spenden sowie öffentliche und private Geldgeber angewiesen. Mit einer einmaligen oder einer regelmäßigen Spende sichern sie unsere vielfältige Arbeit. Damit machen sie es möglich, dass das zu Unrecht vergessene Opernhaus wieder in das kulturelle Bewusstsein des Publikums zurückkehrt. Mit uns machen sie diese vorbildliche Kulturinstitution den breiten Kreisen kulturinteressierter Menschen wieder zugänglich. Ihre Spende hilft ebenfalls, junge Generationen für die alte Kultur wieder zu öffnen. Unser Spendenkonto finden Sie unter diesem Beitrag und auf der Homepage. Spenden Sie über PayPal oder Patreon oder durch eine einfache Überweisung. Wir danken Ihnen dafür im Voraus. In der nächsten Folge berichten wir aus Schloss Gottorf in Schleswig-Holstein. Es geht um einen der wichtigsten Gründer der Hamburger Gänsemarktoper, den Herzog von Holstein und Gottorf, Christian Albrecht. Wir sprechen darüber mit Dr. Ute Kuhl und Dr. Matthias Kirsch. Das war Oper am Gänsemarkt Insight. Einblicke in die Hamburger vergessene Berühmtheit. Bis zum nächsten Mal.